Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Biblical Bookworm. My name is Elizabeth, and today we'll continue with the last part of my summary of the biblical series by Jordan Peterson. In case you haven't watched part 1 and 2, I'll give you a quick overview of this summary. It consists of 3 parts. You're currently watching part 3. Part 1 are Jordan Peterson's ideas on the significance of the Bible, hints that something supernatural exists, the nature of God, and the nature of humans. Part 2 was about mental health and his advice on how to be successful. And in part 3, I'm going to summarize the main lessons from specific biblical stories. When it comes to the fall, Dr. Peterson asks the question what consciousness, nakedness, and the knowledge of good and evil have in common, as those 3 things happen in Genesis during the fall. You know, Adam and Eve were naked. After they ate the apple, they realized that. In other words, they became conscious of that. And the tree where they got the apple from was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so Dr. Peterson explains how those 3 could be connected, which is something he spent a lot of time thinking about, as he says. First, when people get self-conscious, they get thrown out of paradise because they realize their faults, and then he says that the only way to be a torturer is by knowing what could hurt you. So you have to explore your own vulnerability. And when you're naked, you're vulnerable. And as Dr. Peterson explains, to be naked in front of a group is social humiliation, and one of the 2 biggest fears of humans together with death. By knowing that being naked would be humiliating to you, you now know how to do evil by humiliating someone else. So to sum up, you get thrown out of paradise when you get self-conscious. Becoming conscious of the fact that you're naked and the fact that it makes you vulnerable gives you the ability to hurt others, so to do evil. Regarding consciousness, Dr. Peterson made another very interesting statement. And then you think, what role do women play in relationship to men? Well, first, they make them self-conscious. Men don't precisely like that, and there's nothing that will make a man more self-conscious than being rejected. Why? Because why is he rejected? Well, Mother Nature, in the guise of a particular woman, has said that you're not so bad for a friend, but there's no reason your genetic material should propagate itself into the future. Another lesson from the fall is the danger of the intellect. Dr. Peterson hypothesized that the snake in the garden symbolizes the intellect that has fallen in love with its own productions, and this, so pride and arrogance, is in general a danger of the intellect according to Dr. Peterson, and actually many spiritual books I've read. He says that a person with an IQ of above 160 can be completely useless, and just because you're smart doesn't mean that things should be just given to you. I like to read a quote from the biblical series where Dr. Peterson talks about a very intelligent friend who had to accept jobs that were way beneath his intellectual potential. He had that real intellectual arrogance, and really smart people often come to believe that only smart matters. If they're smart, and all that matters is smart, and then the world is sort of laying itself at their feet, then they have been terribly betrayed. Then they point to their intelligence, which is more like a talent or a gift. It's like a false idol, which is exactly what it is, and a very dangerous one. Smart is a good thing, but I'll tell you, if you don't use it properly, it will devour you, just like an arbitrarily assigned talent. If you misuse it, it will be your enemy. What Cain does, according to Dr. Peterson, is betraying his own ideal as he did something he knew to be wrong. And that's something that we often do when we're jealous of someone else. You see this in a cynicism that people have about people who have done well in the world. They're always looking for some reason they have done well. They must be crooked, or they must be conniving, or they must be arrogant, or they must be psychopathic. And of course, all of those things exist. But it's a very bad trick to play on yourself to make the proposition that the person in the world who represents your own ideal is that ideal because of despicable reasons. Because what you do is you train yourself that the ideal that you should pursue can only exist if it's motivated by despicable reasons. And then what? Not only is Abel, your brother, dead, as your brother in the field, in reality, but you've also slaughtered your own ideal. Well then, what are you going to work for? How are you going to live then? Bitterly and miserably. He continues by saying that people hardly ever publicly express admiration for someone, but rather criticize. The main lesson from Noah's Ark is that the flood will come and you better be prepared. This quote summarizes it perfectly. You're going to develop a serious illness, at least one, maybe two or three, and one of them is likely to be chronic. And if it isn't you, it's going to be someone you love. Just exactly what sort of person are you going to be when that shows up? Happiness comes and goes like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. If you're happy, more power to you. Enjoy it. It's a gift from the cosmos to be happy. But a pursuit? No. The pursuit is, when the flood comes, you want to be the person who built the ark. And that's what the story of Noah is about. Then there is the story of the calling of Abraham in Genesis 12:1, when God told Abraham to go to a country which he would show him. Dr. Peterson interprets that as God calling us to do something through interests. Let me clarify this with a quote. You can't make yourself interested in something. Interest manifests itself and it grips you. Is that divine power? Well, it's divine as far as you're concerned because it grips you and you can't do anything about it. It doesn't matter what you call it exactly. It doesn't matter to what it is, to what it's called. It still is. If you do not listen to it, and I've been a clinician and talked to enough people to now, as old as I am, to know this absolutely. If you do not listen to that thing that beckons you forward, you will pay for it like you cannot possibly imagine. You'll have everything that's terrible about life in your life, and nothing about it that's good. And worse, you'll know that it was your fault, and that you squandered what you could have had. Contrary to common belief, Dr. Peterson argues that the crucial point of Sodom and Gomorrah is not homosexuality, but the warning to treat the strange, including strangers, well, as well as the warning of the danger of immediate gratification. In that story, strangers come to Sodom and Gomorrah and get abused by its inhabitants. To be exact, in Genesis 19:5 it says, "And they called unto Lot, and said unto him, Where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them." And Dr. Peterson's interpretation of that is, that's the part of the story that's been used as a diatribe, let's say, against homosexuality. Because to know is to engage in sexual intercourse. The inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah were willing to tear the strangers out of Lot's house and use them and abuse them as they saw fit. So what are they doing? Well, they're violating the principles that govern appropriate conduct with a stranger. And maybe the stranger is something you shouldn't mess with because you don't know who you're messing with. So that's warning number one. They're violating the essential principles of hospitality. The sexual thing is something more like the absolute danger of immediate gratification, sexual included, outside the constraints of any civilized structure. We're now at the end of my summary of the biblical series by Jordan Peterson. I hope you enjoyed it. See you next week. God bless and bye!